Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. I am so excited to get very acquainted with our new friend, Debra Solomon, who's joining us on today's episode. She's been making animated films and illustrating books for a very long time. She is a New York Film Academy Fellow and a Jerome recipient. And she's received a bunch of awards, too many to even announce. And her film, Everybody's Pregnant, is in MOMA's film and video collection. Back in 2001, she helped create the Disney Channel's first hit show, everybody's favorite Lizzie McGuire. And she also worked on the film as well. And in 2017, she was invited to join the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. I don't want to keep talking and listing her resume. I want to get right into the conversation. Hello, Debra. Welcome.
Hi. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm working on new material. And unlike in my mistakes in the past, working on one thing at a time, I've sort of started a number of small projects, and whichever gets boarded out wins.
Was that always your MO, to kind of just focus on one thing and
Yes.
then try to get it out there, focus on the one thing, then try to sell it, focus on one thing?
Right. Because I'm like a monomaniac. Stopping something once I've started doing it is very hard. So I've always just done one thing and worked on it and finished it. And then it's like being pushed out of a car. You're like, oh my God, well, that's over. And now what? And I just finally realized that I have to have a number of things, sort of number of irons in the fire.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's the way I've always worked. Well, for a couple of reasons. One, practical, right? Because you never know what's gonna be sold, or what people are gonna take interest in. And B, like you said, it keeps. I feel like it keeps the brain, feels at least my brain moving, to have say it's like 3 different projects, and it's really fun for me to kind of keep my mind thinking about 3 different subjects at all time, because I don't get too down the rabbit hole on one, because I can say, all right, I need to pause, let me go over here and let's talk about the production design of this particular music video, which is very almost cartoonish, and then okay, let me move over here to this horror script and figure out how to make this not hokey. So I that's kind of always how I've operated.
Right. I think part of the reason I fell into the habit of working on one thing at a time is my short films were generally a reaction to something that happened in my life. And my films are autobiographical. And in the beginning, I was generally working during the day to pay for my film that I worked on at night and in the weekends, because I've never done anything like GoFundMe or.
So you were working on multiple projects. It's just they weren't all your projects.
Right. Well, I started off as an illustrator. When I got out of Pratt, I started working as an illustrator. I worked exclusively in illustration for 18 years. It actually was, this is so like TMI on a radio program. But I had untreated thyroid disease, and I was like very tired all the time. And I didn't start getting the medication I needed till I was 34, when I forced my general practitioner. I said, you either give me this medicine or I'll find it on the street. And he was like, okay, you will try it. And if you don't feel better after 2 weeks, we'll take you off. And in 2 weeks, I felt like I had been reborn, like reborn.
Wow. I've heard so many stories like that. Like, what was his reasoning of not wanting you on the medication? Because
Because
I've heard
my numbers were low normal. And as they now know, because this is a while ago, that basically some people are much more sensitive to their thyroid levels. And some people like are walking around and they should be dead and they don't know it and they feel fine. And other people like me are really, with the slightest drop in the level, you feel very, very tired. I tell people that I am never going to get old because I've already been old. Like I have been there. In my 20s, I was at least 100. And it was only till when I got this medicine that I was able to think about really doing anything that called for real sort of desk time.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. So
Yeah,
you take this medication, you thumb your nose at the doctor, you're
yeah,
feeling good. So
right.
what happens next?
Then I continue working as an illustrator and making money, but making pretty good money because my dad and my grandfather really sort of taught me how to schmooze people. And at
Hmm.
that time in illustration, you could get in to meet art directors. And it was really pre-computers was the heyday of illustration. And I would get in to see people by telling them I would bring them a cappuccino at the New York Times and or cappuccino and a croissant. And
Uh,
I worked there for many years, 3 days a week. I had a lot of wonderful art directors who wanted to inject some humor into their business columns and whatever else. And so I did very well in my work, having learned sort of like some basic business stuff from my dad.
that's really fun. So you're doing this business, this illustration. Were you creating the captions or anything? Were they captions sort of
No,
like the New Yorker, or no, were they just?
in the beginning, when I started working as an illustrator, I was mainly in fact, exclusively doing captionless art. They really didn't let you or like for you to put any words in your drawings. That didn't come until like maybe 5 years in to working. I got a call from Newsday and an art director there asked me if I would like to do a cartoon for a science column. Of course, I said yes. I never said no. In fact, I used to tell people that I was an illustration whore, that there was nothing wouldn't do. I did dog bowls. I was working for Screw Magazine and Highlights at the same time.
Oh my God,
I
that's
mean,
hilarious.
really, I was like, they were like, can you channel your work? You betcha.
You like
Anyway,
improv, right? Yes, and can you do this?
right.
Yes, and.
And yes. So I started working on this column. And actually, I worked on that column for 17 years. And that column, I was allowed to write anything I wanted. And I generally did 3 panels. And when we started off working on How Come, it was pre-fax machine. So somebody would call me up and read me the headline for the article. At that time, they had a guy at Newsday, and they had guys like this or women like this at every newspaper who specialized in headlines.
Hmm.
And so he would tell me the headline, and roughly what it was about. And remember, it was a science column. And I had like a 1950s encyclopedia, no internet, right? That's isn't and I would do the science drawing and make fun of whatever was in the column. A couple of years in, I got my first fax machine. I remember it cost $2,500.
Isn't that funny? I bought my last fax machine for like $17 at a Walgreens.
Right, right. Actually, they were probably giving it away with the
Right.
catalogue. Right, but it cost $2,500. I had it forever, and I then could read the column, but there was no internet. So when the drawing was due, I knew when the pouch left from 34th and Park, and I had to get from my apartment at 111th Street and Broadway to Park Avenue and 34th Street. Generally, I would leave myself at least 20 minutes. And
how,
it was like a mad dash
how
to get.
long was the turnaround? Like when they'd give you, hey, this is the article that's coming out. How much of a turnaround did you have to come up with
Oh,
the illustration?
I had, that was the good part. Well, I had almost a week generally.
Okay.
Kathy Wallard, I should mention her. Kathy Wallard was the writer for the How Come column, and they turned down Isaac Asimov for
Oh,
Kathy
wow.
Wallard. Kathy was able to capture the wonder of being inside a raindrop, or just, she just had a way to relate science in a way that was so captivating that kids loved it and adults read the column too. Eventually we had 5 books, and teachers all over the states used these books, the How Come books, to teach science. So it was a great job. And over the years that I worked on it, it was my training in how to make anything funny. And literally, I mean, the AIDS crisis, I had to do a drawing about that, even though I remember at the time we were working on that column. My younger brother very, very tragically had AIDS. And I had 2 mice getting off, walking down a rope from a ship. And I can't remember what they were saying to each other, but it was mildly humorous. Anyways, so wave theory, particles, why are my eyes brown and my brother's eyes are blue? That sort
Hmm.
of thing. The questions kids ask.
Ask, how come? Why?
And actually, kids from the column at one point was syndicated in Mexico, all over the United States, and in India. And so the questions were written in by kids all over the world.
That's so exciting. How cool is that to like have, and you're still relatively early in your career, yes?
Yes, I'm just beginning.
Yeah, so how cool is that to like be working on something and for it to have like this kind of global impact? Like that's kind of amazing.
Right. Oh, I thought you were talking about now.
Oh,
It was part of the avalanche of work that I really expected to turn around every week. And so I was working in advertising and in editorial work, and I I was illustrating telephone books and dog bowls. I mean, you name it. Actually, my wonderful partner Dan tracked down on eBay all of these bowls with my designs. I had done these bowls, and I called them the 24-hour cat and the 24-hour dog And then I had the 24-hour, it wasn't a civet, it was another animal that people had as pets. But somebody
Like a ferret?
a ferret, right? Somebody stole the artwork off of the bowls that had been issued like 10 years before and was selling bowls with my drawing. And they didn't even bother to take my name off.
Wow.
Yeah.
What? Did you
So
do
it's
anything about it or did you just leave it?
nah, it's sort of a compliment, you know. My first drawing that appeared anywhere and was stolen was I was in my first year at Pratt, and we entered a competition for the first apartheid calendar, anti-apartheid calendar. Sorry, it's a
Like, oh, let's
pro-apartheid,
talk
but
about
it was
this.
no, but it was against the apartheid, um uh and my drawing got picked, and it was really scribbles of the family, like a mother, a father, and two kids, but like where the heads were wasn't real, they really weren't there. And the what I wrote on it was where are their graves in Soweto. So because that it just everything you heard at that time was so incredibly horrifying. And it was still going on, and Nelson Mandela was sitting in jail.
Hmm.
So this drawing was in that calendar and is now part of the anti-apartheid collection at the University of Michigan.
Oh, that's really awesome.
Yes, and that was my first published drawing. And then I'm watching TV, and it was a protest somewhere, and there was my drawing on T-shirts.
Oh well, you know what? At the end of the day,
Yeah. And
you are a part
a
of a
part
very
of
good cause.
right. And I saw it, and I felt so honored that my my sentiment had come across in this drawing, that my personal horror of like what was going on. So
And
that
that
was
people related to it, like it was impactful, like people related to it so much that they're like, yes, I want to share this same visual message.
right, that it represented their feelings. So
Yeah.
anyways, so that was Pratt. And I went and I studied drawing and illustration, and knowing full well when I went to art school that I wanted and needed to earn a living when I got out of school. Um, so
Yeah.
yep.
So going jumping back up to your time with the Why Not books, etc. So at what point did you move into television and film?
Um, so I uh so I had taken animation classes on and off. And never I took one with at SVA with, I think her name was Rose Sonnenfeld. Anyways, it was a good class, but I didn't feel really inspired. And then I took a class at SVA, and oh my God, I cannot remember his name. I'm so embarrassed because this teacher was so inspiring. It on um wasn't heavy on specifics in terms of animation, like this is how you do a walk cycle, and this is how you do whatever. But I basically, I'm just gonna turn my phone off. But it was inspiring, and and actually this animator's name is in the credits of my films.
Don Dugga.
Yes, Don Duga.
Boom.
Hey, all right.
It's magic.
So that was very good. That was excellent. So I took his class, and I started to make a film that was sort of based on a humor book that I had done. And then I went to the Matisse exhibit. I had actually, with the other film, I had a track recorded, and it was put on sheets, and that really, getting the sheets sort of really flipped me out. And then I went to the Matisse exhibit, and there is Mrs. Matisse, Amelie Matisse, on the quay in a kimono, posing for her husband in every room in the beginning of the exhibition. And then you come to a little sign that said, Matisse moved by himself to the south of France. And I was like, what happened to his wife? And I had recently been left. And not that, I mean, eventually it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. But in the moment when it
In the
happened,
moment, you're like, oh no,
oh no, this is
we're not gonna let this happen to another one. We gotta.
my entire life is going off a cliff. Anyways, so I was like, yeah, me and Amelie Matisse. And so I basically channeled, my life into the life of Amelie Matisse, and yet just making some assumptions about what it must have been like to be married to, I hope I can say this, and I'll just say a jerky painter. I won't swear, right? Swearing is better not. I'll avoid swearing. So, and because I basically felt there was nothing written about her anywhere. Remember, no internet. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can go to the picture collection at 42nd Street and look at pictures, but I mean, and you can read something in history books, but there's no way of like Googling
And
Amelie.
getting like that full picture, like to a
Right,
certain extent, she was sort of erased from history to a certain extent. Her
right.
story.
Well, not now.
Mm-hmm.
However, I made the film knowing just on pure, like, every every woman knows what her story is. You go through menopause, and all of a sudden your husband's coming home late. And anyways, so I made the film, and people were also saying to me, you're going to get sued by his estate, you're going to be sued by his family. And by that time, I had an idea about like what fair use meant, and I used all of his pictures as my backgrounds. However, I collaged them from verticals into horizontals.
Mm.
So none of the pictures were used as is. And I also did a lot of pulling elements out of his pictures as if they were characters. Um, in fact, I even had my little Mrs. Matisse being chased by his famous squiggles. Oh, those funny deep blue shapes that look like leaves. You know, she gets chased around by them. But so I made the film, and lo and behold, after it appears at in New Directors, New Films,
Hmm.
or wherever it appeared in New York. Now I'm like, I think it was Everybody's Pregnant that was in New Directors. Anyways, I get a letter from Matisse's great granddaughter, and it basically said, "You hit the nail on the head."
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, they're basically, that if you haven't, or for anyone who hasn't seen the film, that famous painting where the nymphs are dancing around in a circle. I had
Hmm.
a nude Matisse run in to that circle of women and chase them around.
Like Benny Hill style.
Right, exactly. And it was yeah, so it was a lot of fun making that film. And that film, it was my first animated film, and it did insanely well. And it sort of said to me, you worked as an illustrator for 20 years and you won a funny bone at the Society of Illustrators. I was like, I think it calls for a career change. So that is about the time that after I made my first film, that I started transitioning completely into animation.
That's so fascinating. And it probably was a good time to do so, to expand, just in terms of how not too long after that was is when we start to see the kind of like the start of the decline of print media, you know?
Right. And actually, um, I felt like I think through my career, like I've been walking across a lily pond, and as I leave a lily pad and move forwards, it sinks and disappears. And that is exactly what happened to illustration. As soon as there were computers, people like what was it? His last name's Quast. Seymour Quast sold his entire illustration of for like $2 million. And then as soon as there were computers, an art director didn't need an illustrator, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because they could just take a block of color and put something in the middle of it, like a feather, you know,
Right.
no, a, an etching of an urn. Like they literally no longer needed illustrators like they had before. And then the all of print media, as computers come in, print media starts to melt away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's
Is
really interesting. I used to work for Time Warner back
uh-huh.
when we still had Time Inc. And I worked on when they were spinning when they were basically Time Warner was getting rid of Time, and so they were spinning it off to its own company, and I worked on part of that in my duties working for Time Warner Corporate. But I remember I would have to go over to the Time Inc. building pretty frequently. And that was always so cool because it's like building is like frozen in time. Like you truly feel like you're walking into like the Mad Men set. Like you half expect Don
Right.
Draper himself to walk in with holding a bourbon. But I just remember how because that was such a proud brand, and so many of the people had spent their entire careers there, and I just remember how just sad everyone was.
Right. And what sort of a decision was that when Time Inc. decided to jettison time? It's like hello, maybe that wasn't the best decision.
Well, Time Inc. So I was at Time Warner. So Time Warner
Right,
owned Time Inc., which owned Time Magazine and all the magazines. They
right,
also owned HBO, and they also owned Warner Brothers, and they also
right.
owned Turner. The thing that was fascinating was that Time Warner was created because at the time, Time Inc. was so large,
Yeah.
they bought Warner Brothers. So the
Uh,
magazines were the people who created the monolith. But by the time we got, I remember like the earnings call, by the time we got to, the place where they were spinning it off,
yeah.
like literally Time Inc. as a whole, their revenue was something like 10% of the entire company's revenue.
Uh-huh.
Like it became such a small part of the revenue, and every year the
Right.
revenue shrank and shrank. And so they finally just said, it's just interesting, just because you just see the evolution. Just even you talking about, going from illustrations to computers, then going from computers, then going from everyone reading their newspaper every day to reading their newspaper every day on their app. And now we're moving into a new evolution with AI. It's just interesting to
And
see.
people are getting their news on TikTok. Uh,
Oh,
and, I, I don't really, I don't get it. I mean, are people getting like stupid?
I think, can I tell you, it's so funny. So I'm actually, one of the documentaries I'm working on isn't mine. I'm hired by this individual,
Yeah,
and she's kind of daffy, right? A,
yeah.
a daffy old rich lady. She's like 60. And I remember like we were having a conversation, and she very matter of factly said, I get my news on TikTok. And I was, I was like, what?
Yeah. Well, she's watching PBS TikTok.
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. Does PBS have a TikTok?
No, I made
Like,
that
I
up.
want to see, like,
I totally made that up. Yeah,
that
but
would be kind of amazing to see, like, who hosts NewsHour now, like doing like one of those music dance challenges. Like,
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't get it. News on TikTok. It's just, it's weird.
yeah.
Anyway,
Well, anywho, well, it's basically all opinion, right? It's like editorial. It's the same thing as like the editorial page, or the opinion page where people write in to the newspaper, except for the entire paper is nothing but just people writing in with their opinions.
right, right, right.
Yeah.
So now it seems that the animation industry is also going going through a horrible reckoning as well. And
Hmm.
uh I am not uh thankfully out there beating the bushes looking for animation work. Um but it is, from what I hear from people, it is not a great time for animation.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not a great time for a lot of different creators and media. But also, I think it's also, um, it's not just the technology. I think it's also the makeup, right? Where once upon a time, all of the media companies were owned by media companies,
Right.
whereas now they're owned by other companies that, media is kind of like the loss leader. Media is the sexy business, but it's not the, I don't know. I think we're moving into a place where creative doesn't lead in the same way that
Right.
creative used to lead, and as a result,
But it,
it
but I also think, Jordan, that there's some leftovers here from the writers' strike, like
mm-hmm.
pipelines, like, if you're going to animate this, these pipelines sort of go rubbery and collapse because for so long people weren't working, and uh animation does start with scripts.
Mm-hmm. This
uh
is true.
so but I'm not really an aficionado. on that. So what am I
Well,
an aficionado on?
well, let's talk about this while you're thinking about what you're an aficionado on. You've moved into animation. Let's talk about Lizzie McGuire. How did that come about?
So I worked when I finished Everybody's Pregnant, I was actually pitching a How Come animated show. That was what I was out there pitching. Um and I remember having a phone call with someone because I had done like a Bible and created all these characters for a How Come show. And I had also sent this, whoever it was, an art director, a producer, I had sent him my film, Everybody's Pregnant. So, like, hey, this is what I can do. And this is the show I'd like to make. And he like did not want to talk about the How Come animated show. He was like, I want to talk about your film. It's like amazing. And I was like, oh, really? Like literally, I made this film. I made this film because the person I was married to at the time, we were going to adopt a baby in China, and he came home one day. Here comes the TMI, folks. And he ripped up all my maps of China, and I had been going to these people with children from China meetings. Um,
Uh,
and I was like ready to adopt a baby in China because I had found out that I couldn't have kids.
mhm.
And he was like, he ripped up all the maps and all the baby name books, and he was like, we're not doing this. And my reaction to that was making Everybody's Pregnant.
Mhm.
And it was so hyper personal that it was almost embarrassing while I was working on it. And I made it because I had to make it, because I realized that the only babies was going to have were my films. Anyway, so this film did, like, much to my enormous surprise, did enormously well. And it came to the attention of a producer who was working at N.Y.F.A, who shall be remain nameless. And I worked with him on a I think it was a 7-minute cartoon. It's on my website. It's called Nikki. And it was about like a 13-year-old or 12 or 13-year-old kids, like on the loose in New York, following people around. So I have Everybody's Pregnant, out there, and it's doing really well. And then I'm working with this guy who has a manager in California, in Hollywood. And they and the manager starts representing me. Not 100% like behind my work, but whatever. Anyways, he starts managing me, and he shows my work to to uh to someone at Disney, and he likes my work, and he brings my work to the executive producer of Lizzie. And his name is Stan Rogao. And Stan loved my work, and he sent me 2 audition tapes, one of a little brunette girl that was sort of unremarkable, and one of this Spitfire, Hilary Duff, when she was like 12 or 13. And she is the very picture of budding sexuality and very exciting. And she, of course, got picked for the show, and I based my character designs on what Hillary was wearing to her audition.
Oh.
She was wearing like platform flip-flops and she was wearing a little form-fitting, like little like muscle tee sort of thing. That was a little, and then jeans. The shirt she was wearing for the audition had like a really cool like Indian madras print, and which is like prints like that are a big no-no in animation. But I just lifted her outfit. The challenge came because Hillary was so incredibly adorable and beautiful. And what I decided was that I couldn't make it look like her, that I had to make an icon that represented her. And so I gave her a lollipop head with essentially the same little hairdo. And and so basically they hired me to work on the pilot, and it got picked up. And it was incredibly exciting. Yeah. And really incredibly fun to work on. And I loved the executive producer. Stan Rogow, was a genius. And he took the Bible, which was written by someone who had written other very successful sort of heartfelt shows, but not a whole lot of humor. Stan took that basic Bible, and so it was a story of a girl who was sort of an outcast in her school and unpopular and sort of klutzy. And he cast the hottest little girl you've ever seen in your life as the outcast, right? So
Yeah.
even the beautiful, mean girls, the popular girls, couldn't hold a candle to her, but that was the show's conceit. And that is why Stan was a genius.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
he not only, he not only then cast Hillary, turning the whole Bible on its head, he brought in the idea of the animation. It had never been done before in a live action show. And Stan decided she should have an inner voice that's talking to her. And when I started working on it, I very quickly realized, when I was like a 15-year-old, 14-year-old kid, my father would call me either a Weisenheimer or a wise ass, and because I always was very sarcastic and never took things very seriously. And I created this, this other layer of humor that on top of the humor that Stan was putting into the show with the writers. In fact, I remember this guy's name, Walter Kerr, who used to be a critic for the New York Times, said that animated Lizzie was like a Woody Allen if he had been a 15-year-old girl. So that it was like the highest compliment in my career. So
Okay.
we basically what I understand that Stan did, not only putting the animation into the show and making it humorous, sometimes I would talk to him and he would say, he'd pick up the phone and go, I can't talk now. He was going over to the woman's house who played the mom, and he was going to, with his old movie camera, and he was going to shoot black and white footage of the mother, like, like giving Lizzie a hard time, but close up, so you could see all the little lines around her mouth. I mean, like while she was talking, like Lizzie, it was everything he brought into the show hadn't been done before. He was using cartoon effects in the live action, like sound effects.
Yeah.
And it was nutty. Everything about the show was nutty. And the introduction where they were chasing like this beach ball around in between lines that are moving on the screen. It was there wasn't a thing about that show that wasn't got groundbreaking. And it also advocated for kids and their problems. It, you know, what you do when your best friend hasn't been invited to the party that you're going to. It was all sort of the tumult in these kids' lives, like in 8th grade. And I don't know, I loved working on it. And um, everyone who worked on it, I think, really had a good time. Actually, one of the storyboard artists that I'm still friendly with, Richard Codor, um, he brought to the storyboards just so much sass and character. And still people ask him to do Lizzie drawings, and he like whips out drawings for them. It was it just was a very special time. And just today I was talking to someone, uh actually, I was at physical therapy because I hurt my shoulder, and the young woman who was helping me was telling me how much she loved Lizzie, and we were talking about some of the same things and sort of covering like why the reboot didn't happen. And I can talk about that.
Yeah, what do you think that is?
So now you know that I love Stan. And his genius was not only in what he added to the show, but it is in his support of every artist. He once even said to me, I said I wasn't sure about doing something, and he said, oh, give me full board, Debbie. He wanted the best. He wanted the most from you. Anyways, someone, maybe I won't name that person, someone decided that Lizzie would be better recreated as a drama. As a
Oh,
30 something drama. Somebody who maybe didn't realize that the people who watched Lizzie and loved it to death were people who loved the humor.
right. They probably were thinking, okay, well, so the whole idea was probably to age her. So now she's the same age as the people who used to watch back then. Was that kind of the concept?
Well, here's the thing. I have been turning my life problems into humorous films since 1994. I have not aged out of humor.
Mm.
Okay. and I'm a lot older than Hillary. I think that it is the humor in life that makes it palatable, that makes life palatable, that makes us all feel like it's worth it. Like at least you can sit back and laugh that the baker that you were dying to meet on a date just didn't show up. You know, that all the things that happen to you are in their own way, if you give it enough time, they're funny, and you can basically turn lemons into lemonade.
Yeah,
And
you can find like the irony of a situation. You can find the farce in a situation. You can find the like just the ridiculousness of a situation that in the moment was painful. Totally.
right. And I still think, when I talk to my friend Richard Codor, we sort of think, oh, we could still do it. If we could convince Hillary that, making it funny would make Disney interested again. And that's sort of in the back of my mind, that's sort of my dream, is like that maybe one day that we could do it and make it funny and sort of extend the humor and the comedy that we found in Little Lizzie into like an older Lizzie.
Mhm.
So that's my dream.
So they wanted to do it like not as like a dramedy, but like as a straight up drama.
No,
Like as
I don't know what the point is of what we were doing, but it wasn't, you can tell when you're working with people who love the animation, who are like, hey, we can't wait to see what you do with this. And there wasn't that feeling. And I think if things were reconsidered now, with Hillary having kids, and I'm certain she's found the humor in having kids,
Mhm.
that 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 using the same 15-year-old or whatever 13-year-old animated Lizzie would all still work, because what is it when you get scared or angry or you have something that's really pressing? Who's talking to you, right?
Little
It's that,
you. Little
yeah,
you, that kid you
that little you. Like, I can't believe she took the armrest in the theater. Like, get your arm off of my arm. That little kid is in all of us still. And I think could be really great.
I think that that sounds hilarious. I think that that sounds wonderful. I think it sounds endearing. Yeah, totally.
So, Hillary, if you hear this, maybe it's time to think about the humor.
I love it. I think that that actually is the perfect place to stop because we have sponsors. Thank
Oh, of course,
goodness.
that's
But
wonderful.
it's been such a pleasure getting to know you. This has been so wonderful. Where can our listeners, where can they find you online and find some of your wonderful films?
All of my films, except for the most recent, but it will be going up there probably in the next week, are at debrasolomon.com.
DebraSolomon.com. That's nice and easy.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank
And,
you, thank you, thank you. I can't wait to see what next you come up with.
thank
You're an
you,
absolute
Jordan.
pleasure.
Jordan, thank you for this opportunity. I enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, ditto. You're very,
Okay.
very welcome.
Okay.
Thank you all out there in Radio Land. We will catch you next week for another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Hazel and friends, right here on Hot 702.5 FM, Las Vegas.